talk to you about the practicalities and some of the fun she's had climbing. This is set in Kentucky. In Kentucky, there's actually a place called the Red River Gorge. Back in 1970, when I went to the Red River Gorge, the water source was a pipe that came out of a rock. And that was your only water source for the Red River Gorge. Now, people from all over the world, literally from all over the world, come to climb at Red River Gorge. Back then, there was one guidebook. Guidebooks are things that, you know, give you some idea as to what the climb is like. It was by Martin Hackworth, one of them. Now there's probably 15 guidebooks to the gorge. But seriously, people from all over the world come to the gorge. So I'm sure Jenny is going to be able to enhance the reputation of the gorge even further. And we appreciate her coming to talk to us about the book. And you all have a good time and enjoy your lunch. Thank you for lunch, Amy.
Thank you. So this was my, I guess I'm just going to kind of ramble because I didn't really prepare anything. And for some reason I thought it was like a Q&A.
It will be.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
Whatever you want.
So this is my debut novel. It's not the first novel I ever wrote. I have like another one that what we authors say is in the trunk, meaning that, like, you know, if you want to get like a horror metaphor, it's like under the floorboards, like the Edgar Allan Poe Telltale Heart sort of thing. Like you've written it, it's done, but it's never gonna see the light of day. So that first one was kind of like my learning experience, I guess. I don't think it was wasted time. Some authors might, or some writers might feel like if you don't publish everything you write, it feels like wasted time. But for me, I sort of look at it as a writing experience, or like a learning experience. But this was my debut novel. This was the second, I guess, book that I actually wrote. And it sort of started, so I've been rock climbing since like 2012 now, so I don't know, like 13 years if I can do math. And so this one, I started writing it I started like working on it in 2019, and it sort of started with just the idea of like, how can I fit rock climbing into a horror story? And I felt like even then that rock climbing is like kind of a dangerous, terrifying sport, so I felt like it would lend itself really well to horror. And I think somebody else wrote a rock climbing horror novel that came out like a year after mine, but there wasn't, at the time, I didn't know of any rock climbing horror books. So I just decided to put my experience rock climbing into it. Most of my experience is in gym climbing because that's what's locally available, but I've been to Red River Gorge several times. I've been to an hour north of here. There's a small bouldering area called in Muscatatuck National Park. And then I've been to Chattanooga once. And so this book did start with me sort of just thinking like, well, how can I put rock climbing into a novel or into a story? And from there, it kind of, developed, and it sort of started with like a few scenes that came to me of like sort of supernatural things that might happen. Like what if someone was climbing a rock wall and then they like, sort of look around and they're just like encased by like a wall of rock, and they're just like, the only way to get out is to go up. Or like, what if you are kind of like, you feel like you're climbing in a loop, like no matter how much you are climbing, you're just repeating the same movements over and over. So sort of like weird things like that. And I honestly don't remember. So the premise of the book, if you haven't read it, is that there's 4 people. There's 2 grad students and a climber and her boyfriend / belayer who go into the Kentucky woods, and they think that they are finding the next hot rock climbing spot. The 2 grad students are in the geology department, and I said it in Kentucky, so they're geology students at UK, and they have used LIDAR technology, which is like kind of like bats, like sonar, but it's like lasers that go down, they like map topography. So they've used that technology, and it's like a PhD student who's trying to find a rock climbing wall because he wants to like travel the world and use this technology to find new rock climbing spots. So he thinks he's found one. He got a really good result from his LIDAR test, And so he recruits another grad student and a climber, like a semi-pro climber that he knows, to come with him to sort of research that area. So they go into that area, but what they don't know is that that area is actually a cursed piece of land that is kind of like sentient and luring them to it. So the book opens with the very first chapter. You learn that they find the bodies of 3 characters, and they're in really weird conditions. So one is like his rib cage is open like a picnic basket. One is, and so they go into the woods in March, and their bodies are found in October of the same year. So one is like a fully bleached skeleton, and one is missing most of his digits, like his fingers and toes and his tongues and his eyes. And so this book is more so not what happens to them, but how did they get that way? And so that opening was inspired by a real life incident called the Dyatlov Pass incident, which, if you haven't heard of that, that's when hikers in Russia they were very experienced hikers. I don't know if I read a book about this earlier this year, and it seemed like they were students. They were trying to get some sort of like hiking certificate. I don't think that's what they were studying. I think they were engineering students, but they were trying to get some sort of hiking certificate. So they had planned out this really treacherous hike in some mountains in Russia, and so they go do that, and they sort of disappear, and then their bodies are found in the next spring once the snow thaws, and their bodies were found in really weird ways. So some of them were like naked by like what looked like a fire pit down like a ravine into some trees. Some were looked like they had put on those people's clothes and were trying to go back to their tent, and the tent was like open from the inside with a knife, and they like came out, and like I think in that one also somebody's like was found with a missing tongue. And so it was one of those things where it was just like a really weird incident. For a really long time, nobody really had any credible theories. There was lots of theories like aliens or, the USSR did it for some reason. They were like too close to some nuclear, I don't know. It was really weird. But interestingly for that, within the past like few years, they used CGI of snow from the film Frozen 2. And based on that, they think it was like a partial avalanche. They didn't think it was an avalanche originally because there was something about like, we would have been able to tell if it was an avalanche, or I don't know how they would tell if all it melted, but. So that was what they figured, was that like they put all their heavy gear on the back part of the tent, like at the top of the slope, and then like this partial avalanche like knocked all of their gear into them, which would cause like all the blunt force trauma they had, and then they didn't know what was happening. It was dark and they tried to leave, and then they were like, oh shit, we shouldn't have done that, we should go back. So anyway, so the opening of the book was sort of inspired by that incident, because whenever you learn about that incident, just like I told it, you always learn like how their bodies were found, and then it kind of backs up to like what we think might have happened. And so as I was developing that, as I was developing this book, I was reading about that. And there's one piece of the book I don't remember where it came from, was like the sentient piece of land. So the book is the premise is kind of like there's this like evil sentient piece of land that's just always been there, and occasionally it gets hungry and like lures people to it. And so there's some what I call historical interludes throughout the book that give like examples of other times. So there's like when colonizers came to Kentucky, the site like made itself look really fertile and promising, so they created a settlement there, but then everything turned sour. I based that on a real winter in Kentucky in like, I think it was it's in the book, 1780 something, I wanna say. Winter 1779 was the coldest winter on record in Kentucky. It was so cold that sap froze in the trees, and it would crack the trees at night, and it would sound like cannon or gunfire. Almost all wildlife died over that winter because it was so cold. And I think there was like a prospector, somebody from Virginia came to Kentucky to do like I don't know, he did something like land settlement or something. But he got stuck there during that winter, and when he got back to Virginia the next spring, they did bloodletting, because that's what they did at the time, and they said his blood was thick like tar. So So I did a lot of research into like historical times. There's also like some moonshiners in here. And I really love doing research. Like I would have never thought of those details about like what might happen in a really cold winter if I hadn't done research and learned about it. I read a whole book on the Wilderness Road for like maybe like 10 pages or less in the book. And yeah, I said it, and then when I was researching the Wilderness Road, which is the road that colonizers carved to get into Kentucky, I was researching that and its path, and that's where, again, I found Rockcastle County in Livingston, Kentucky. I think it's closed now, but there was a spot called Downtown Boulders that was just like this sort of undeveloped rock climbing spot that people could go to, and I think it was just like private land where the owner just didn't really care. But I don't know if it switched hands or something, but last time I looked at it, I haven't actually gone there, but last time I looked at it, it said it was like closed. So you can't boulder there anymore, but that's why it's set in Livingston, Kentucky. The process too, if anybody's interested in like the publishing process of this book, I finished a good draft of it around, I did like a draft and then an edit, and I was sending queries to agents around summer 2021, and that's basically like a cover letter with part of the book that you send to agents that you want to try to sell your book to editors or publishers. And so I was like sending that, and so what you do is usually you send the query letter, which is again like a cover letter if you're applying for a job, and then like some amount of pages. You don't usually send like the whole thing to them. And if they like it, they will request the full manuscript, which is a good sign. And so I was getting a lot of agents that wanted to see the full manuscript, but then that was turning into rejections. So that sort of told me like the opening pages are working really well, but something about the rest of it is not working. So I applied for a mentoring program called Pitch Wars, which was because I was actually the last class, unbeknownst to me when I did it, but they stopped the program after my year. But it was a mentoring program where you kind of repeat that process, like you have like a query letter and some pages that you send to, you can pick 4 mentors, and if they like it, they'll request the full manuscript. And I was lucky enough to be picked for that program by an author named Cynthia Pelayo, who is another horror author, and she's really good, you should check out her stuff. And she helped me edit the book. So the main difference, has anyone read The Ruins by Scott Smith? Okay, so like in that book, the original draft of Wretched Valley was more similar to that book in that each chapter was kind of like all 4 points of views with just like a scene break. And one of the major differences that we did was we changed it so that each chapter is just one point of view in this book. So when I did that, I still have it. I took like a piece of cardboard and different colored post-it notes and like mapped out which character, so each color was like a different character and like what the scene was. So I did have to do a little bit of balancing. So I think if you read it, you'll notice that there's like kind of a little bit of like back and forth because at one point the characters get split up. So unlike the first draft, I couldn't really tell that chronologically if there's like 2 things happening at once with 2 different characters. And so that was the major, and the other thing was that we added in more character work like emotion and stuff like that. I got a degree in creative writing from Western Kentucky University, and I have a master's in, I think it's technically like just English from U of L, but I focus in creative writing. And I feel like every time you take like a creative writing workshop, I felt like, at least my experience was, they really hammer in that like show, don't tell. And so that to me sometimes translates into like, don't just say the character's angry, show how they're angry by like slamming their fist on the desk or, their face goes red. But I think what the mentoring experience sort of taught me was like, you need a little bit of both, because like not everyone experiences anger or whatever emotion the same way. So sometimes you do just kind of have to tell what the emotion is, or like do a little bit of telling. So I think like that experience kind of helped me with that balance. And then at the end of that program, Pitch Wars, it was called Pitch Wars because you present like a pitch They do like a pitch showcase where agents could sign up and look at them and request materials. And so I think my book was like it was one of the highest request rates from that program. But that also meant that it was a lot of rejections in like the same 48 hours. So that was not a fun time, but I did get my agent from that program, and he pretty much immediately started sending the book out to editors. He didn't have me do any more edits or anything, and he sold the book in like a month, which is really, really fast especially for a debut novel, but even just anyone being on submission or like to publishers, that's really fast. So he sold the book really fast to Quirk, who's an independent. They're not like a big 5 publisher, but they're still a pretty big independent. They were at the time distributed through Penguin, so they had a major distributor. And I've been pretty happy with them up until like a year ago. There was like a huge shakeup at Quirk, and now they're like an imprint under another publisher. So I don't think my 3rd book will be coming out through Quirk, but my first 2 books were with Quirk. And yeah, so then it was bought, and I did some edits with the editor at Quirk, and I think like the biggest, we didn't do like a ton of changing to the plot. It was mostly kind of like a little like smaller things. One thing that we did take out was the original draft had like these little excerpts that were like in the point of view of the land itself, that I thought were fun, but I can understand why they wanted to take them out. And the other change we made, it was published in 2024, but the other change we made is you'll see in the book like it's set in 2019. Originally it was set in 2020 in March, and that was just kind of like a funny in-joke to me, is like, haha, these people went into the woods right before everything shut down, and they don't know they don't know the world's having their own like terrible time while they're having a terrible time in the woods. But yeah, it was still kind of like, I think, and they bought it in 2022, so I think at the time it was like still like, it was more fresh, I guess, of like the 2020 drama or whatever. But yeah, so I think that's how this book came to be. If we have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Where is your bookstore?
Yes, I own a bookstore called Butcher Cabin Books. It's an all horror bookstore. It's on Barrett Avenue, right next door to where Lynn's Paradise Cafe used to be. So it's right next door to Big Bad Breakfast. It's 990 Barrett Avenue. It's a white building with a bunch of red drips on the front, and it's all horror. It's pretty small. We're trying to work on like expanding into more of the building, but our team is really small. I own it with my mom, and then we have 2 employees now. So we have a very small team to try to work on renovations and stuff. So it's gonna be very slow. We have no timeline for that.
I'm
sorry.
No, is it specified to horror books or?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. We say it's an all horror bookstore. Our website is actually horrorbookstore.com, and
That's an awesome URL.
I don't know how we got it, but
That's amazing.
it was available. We also have @horror bookstore on Instagram. So you can go there and see what we do. We have books for all ages. So we have like little kid books, picture books. We have middle grade. We have YA. We have some nonfiction that's like horror related, so like true crime, or we were talking about Caitlin Doty, who's like she's like not a funeral director. She's like an embalmer, mortician. That's the word I'm looking for. She's a mortician. She's written a few books. So we have stuff like that. We have a very small sci-fi fantasy section and a very small classics section that sort of focus on like gothic or like darker things. We have poetry. We have short stories. We have Stephen King and Joe Hill quarantined to their own shelf, so you don't have to like go like kick it, okay, and then skip down.
How was, not necessarily with just this book, but how has your book selling experience impacted your book writing?
I don't actually think it has that much, because I feel like I'm an anomaly among writers. I get one idea at a time, and so I guess my fear as a writer is more so like, what if I never have another idea? Because you always will, but I know a lot of writers who are like struggling to figure out which idea to write, and I'm like, I don't have that problem. I just write one at a time. I know which one it is. If I'm having trouble with it, I don't have anything to switch to. I do think in my book selling, I've noticed trends, which seem very coincidental, but they do sort of, to me, touch on like what are some sort of like cultural or societal sort of shared fears. So I think it was like 2022 or 2023, there was a ton of like parenting horror books. So you had Nestlings, which was about like these parents like trying to raise a child in this weird building in New York City. There was What Kind of Mother by Clay McLeod Chapman, which was about, I think it was about like a woman who, for like something, there was something about crabs and babies. I don't remember. There was like a book called Cutting Teeth that was about like sort of evil children that were like, maybe like a virus that like made children want to bite you. Anyway, there was a lot of parenting horror, and so like if you think about, and like books typically take about 1 to 2 years to actually like get published from the time that they're purchased or conceived. So that to me says like, well, what happened 2 years ago that might have made parents very anxious in like 2020.
Yeah.
And so I think now there's a lot of cult books.
Yeah.
So like my Crafting for Sinners was a cult book. And there's like a ton of other cult books coming out last year and this year, and so like that kind of speaks to the cult that runs our country.
What happened in 2024 then?
Yeah.
And Mr. Smith didn't say.
I know, I was looking right at him.
So yeah, that's one thing I have noticed as a horror bookseller specifically, is that there does tend to be, and there's always outliers, you know, there's not every single author is writing a cult book or like a parenting book, but there's like enough where it just feels like a good indicator of a collective societal fear or anxiety.
Oh, sorry.
What?
Do you have any with you today for
I do not. But if you go to either horrorbookstore.com or to Butcher Cabin Books, you can get signed
Yeah,
copies there.
I've been in there. So what time are they open till?
Today we're closed, but we're open Thursdays and Fridays from noon to 7, and then Saturday and Sunday from 11 to 6. But we are closed this Sunday for Father's Day.
Cause my son-in-law boulder climbs and that would be a great birthday present.
Yeah.
Perfect, yeah. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, and if those times don't work for you, you can always order it online.
Do you, I'm a movie person.
Mhm.
This feels like John Carpenter. It reminds me a lot of John Carpenter, like The Fog.
Mhm.
Places where, stories where the world is rejecting something rather
Mhm.
than, person to person. Do you have any particular filmic inspirations that motivated that?
So when I was writing this, I think Blair Witch Project was one. I think I was like, actually like, I hadn't seen that film until I started working on this book. But other than that, I think the only things I really watched for like inspiration were like rock climbing documentaries.
Oh, sure.
So there's a series called Reel Rock, REEL Rock, that I think they do them yearly, and they're just like little vignettes about rock climbers. And then I can't remember how far into it I was with the film Free Fall or Free Solo, not
Oh,
Free Fall,
yeah,
Free
yeah.
Solo came out. And honestly, I think that's the scariest movie I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Free Solo. I saw it in a theater, and even though they tell you, it's sort of like this book where like at the beginning of the film they tell you that like he does it, he, finishes the climb all hunky-dory, but still just like, that was the only film that I think has made my hands like actually sweat.
Yeah.
I
while I was
couldn't watch
watching
the
it.
rest of it. I started, and I
Yeah.
did not watch the rest of it.
It's like, he's crazy. I haven't watched him climb a building, but it's that same guy who climbed that building recently,
That's
Alex
right.
Honnold.
That's right.
Yeah, he was on NPR a couple of days ago,
Oh, okay.
and he sounds perfectly sane, but I think.
Well, in
it's
Free Solo,
unbelievable.
he went to a doctor and they're like, yeah, your amygdala doesn't work. You do not process fear. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I'm trying to think, I'm sure there were other films, but, I can't recall any right now. I do remember, like, I know I watched Blair Witch Project and it's been like compared to that a lot. Trying to think, I'm sure there's like a ton of other like in the woods sort of movies that I've watched, but.
What's a great comparison? I mean, complimentary comparison, right?
Yeah.
To be one of the greatest horror movies ever.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever actually seen The Fog. I've seen the Mist.
Yeah, The Mist, yeah, it was okay.
We
What
should-
about, I'm sorry, no, you
Let's
go
say,
ahead.
you
Yeah.
should drive by our front yard, she's got the
Oh, yeah.
coolest front yard.
We have a big Yeti, or I guess ours is more like a Bigfoot statue in our yard.
You have your skeleton dog.
We do have a skeleton dog, and I think we need to get a new 12-foot skeleton, because ours is kinda sad. Plastic has deteriorated.
So you're writing a third book?
I am writing a third book. It is not sold to anyone, so I can't tell you when it's gonna come out.
Sure.
So my writing process has always been pretty, I would say some writers can just look at a blank page and just start typing, but I can't do that. So I have to kind of I go through stages, and the first stage is and this is, sorry if it's gross, but vomit, where I'm just I have a Word document, I'm just throwing all of my ideas into that document. They might contradict themselves at that point, but I'm just throwing all my ideas in there, and then eventually I can create an outline from that. And the way I create outlines is I sort of try to figure out the major plot points first, and then sort of fill in what might happen to get the character from point A to point B. And then I will take that outline and make what I call a skeleton draft, which is maybe a 20 to 30,000 word document, and for comparison, books are about 80,000 words most of the time. So that's a 30,000 word document where I'm just typing out what happens in each chapter. I'm not worried about dialogue or voice or even grammar at that point. So I guess that's kind of where I kind of look at a blank page and type, but I still have a roadmap. But that's where I feel a lot of the scene ideas come as I'm writing, I think of things, and then once I have that skeleton draft done, I start working on what I call the first draft. So I'm adding flesh to the skeleton basically. And so right now I'm almost done with the skeleton draft of the book, and once I have 50 pages of the actual draft, my agent says we can try to sell it to somebody. But that one has, I don't know if you know the book. Everybody knows when I do this meets this. Most people know one of the books, but it's Whale Fall, which is a Daniel Kraus novel about a scuba diver a diver who gets stuck in a whale and has to figure out how to get out. So I always pitch it as Whale Fall meets Pet Cemetery set in a garbage dump.
I'm sold.
Yeah, I would read that. So with Slade, why did Slade survive?
I don't know. I'm a dog lover, and I always feel I guess there is kind of a fake out scene with Slade, but I don't know. I always feel I guess partly in this specific book, the point is kind of that the cursed land is trying to feed on people who are using it for their gain and not really respecting it. And so I sort of felt Slade wasn't he was kind of taken there against his will, and he was kind of an innocent in the whole thing. But beyond that, I think most people don't they seeing the dogs survive, and I would agree.
That was kind of a nice twist at the end, that the dog does not die, okay? You think that the dog dies, but it doesn't.
Yeah, well, I write that in every copy I sign. I put P.S. the dog lives, and that's marketing.
His name's Slade.
Slade.
Did you get that from Slade in Kentucky?
Yeah.
Where it's at?
Yeah, so the main climber is a woman named Dylan, and she met her boyfriend Luke at Miguel's in Red River Gorge.
Oh, yeah.
So Red River Gorge is in the book, but it's the main parts of it are set in Livingston, or right off of a road in the woods near Livingston, Kentucky.
So did you choose that because, you live in Kentucky and because you're familiar with it, or,
I mean, I think Kentucky itself is just a lot of really weird history and lots of landscape to draw from. And so I think I don't never say never, but so far all of the books that I've conceived are set in Kentucky. This one, I chose a real city because I felt like, it was like more, I guess it was like kind of historical, and it gave a sense of place. In Crafting for Sinners, we did sort of like, it was based on, an area in Kentucky, but I did like make up a new, like a fake town name. And it's set, actually, that one is set on, my original title that I wanted for it was Hell for Certain, and it's set like on that river or creek. I don't know if it's a river or a creek, but there's some body of water in Kentucky called Hell for Certain. And so I wanted the title to be Hell for Certain, because that one's about like a religious cult who is like capturing what they think is a sinner. And so, but the publisher came up with Crafting for Sinners, and I was like, okay, that's fine. I can talk all about title drama. So,
Oh, I would
yeah.
love to hear about that.
okay, so this book was originally titled That Wretched Valley, and they wanted to change it, but I tricked them into keeping it. The way that I tricked them was so that every time, so when you get a book purchased by a publisher, there's a website called Publishers Weekly, and they make it, you like post an announcement saying like, this author's book was bought by this publisher through this agent or whatever. And so this Quirk didn't want to make the announcement until they had a final title, and they were giving me really bad titles. They really wanted it to be called Leave No Trace, and I was like, no, you can't Google that. Like, even on Goodreads, there were already 200 books called Leave No Trace. I was just like, it's not Googleable. And so the way I tricked them was I convinced them to make that Publishers Weekly announcement before we had the final title, because only one other person in my Pitch Wars class had made an announcement that they sold a book, and so it's like, it would be really impressive if it looked like we were like the second ones to like second one from that class to have sold a book. So then they announced it with the original title, and then I got all of my friends to go on the post and be like, oh, I love that title. So then they kept it. I did not have such luck with the second book, and there were like, and then we went back and forth, and a lot of the titles that they were proposing initially were like, to me, made it seem like the book was gonna be a horror comedy. And I always think that there's some like, I put dark humor into the books, like there are moments in Wretched Valley and Crafting for Sinners that like, if I read them back, it makes me laugh. But ultimately, these are not horror comedies. And so I was like, so I pushed back and I was like, well, I don't want, people to get the impression that it's gonna be like a super funny book, because it's not. And so we went back and forth, and then there was like one point where I was this was really weird. I was told like, you need to choose between these two titles, and they were, again, not Googleable. They were like, with every fiber, and like something with so, like a biblical quote that had so in it. I don't remember that one, but it was like biblical quotes, and I was like, I get it, you're like trying to get like fiber and so in there, but I was like, again, these are not, if somebody Googles this, my book is not going to come up. And to me, that's like really important, because I know how people's attention spans are, and so like honestly, like they might remember the title, but they're not gonna remember like probably my name if they've never read any of my books before. And I think even if you put in like, with every fiber horror book, like maybe it would have come up, but I just am like, those are the phrase, like same problem with Leave No Trace, it's like those phrases are too common for a book title. And I know like you can't like copyright titles, but I'm like, but you can like make unique ones that are easy to find when you search the internet. And so I think we kind of my agent and I pushed back on those two. And I think initially we were like, well, if the publisher, if whoever is like really set on those titles, we're like, well, can we like tweak them a little bit to make them more, more unique? And I think my editor came up with Crafting for Sinners, and I was like, okay, because, I think she was, let's play on like Crafting for Beginners. And so that one I was like, okay, that's fitting. I don't think it sounds like cheesy, or it doesn't sound like because a lot of the first ones were like puns, and I was like, it's not a punny book. But I think Crafting for Sinners fits well, and I'm happy with that title. It's Googleable. It doesn't make the book sound like something it's not, although interestingly, so the cover of that book, which is my purse, has like praying hands that were crocheted by like a real artist. Like, it's not a digital mock-up, like somebody an artist in Philadelphia actually crocheted those, so it's like a physical object that I have in my house now. And so they like commissioned an actual piece of art for that, which was really cool. But I don't know if it's because like there's crochet on the cover, but sometimes people will send me, they're like, I saw your book in this list or at this book club, and then I'll look at it and they'll be like, we're doing cozy horror this month, and I'm like, you are in for a surprise. Because both of my, and I think one thing, like if you'll read any of my books, I do include a lot of body horror, which is just like
Yes.
a lot of gore, and so there is a lot of gore in that, in Crafting for Center. I would not call it cozy by any stretch of the imagination. Any other questions?
Can you give us just a little bit of idea of what your third book is gonna be about? You know, just like you said, like this was rock climbing, the other one's cults, you know.
So like I said, my pitch is Whale Fall meets Pet Cemetery in
Okay.
a garbage dump. So basically it's about this small town in Kentucky somewhere. I don't have like a name for it or anything. I don't even know if it'll be named in the book, cause like I think unlike these two books, like the place doesn't really, the specific town doesn't really matter. But maybe I'll name it. But so it's set in like rural Kentucky where there is a sinkhole that appeared overnight in the like 60s or 70s that the owner turned into a garbage dump. And so people for a long time in that small town would just like that's where they would take their garbage and they would just dump it. But the main part of the book is set now, and it's about a lesbian couple who one of them has gone, it's like a year after one of them has gone missing. And people in this town go missing quite often. Maybe like not like super frequently, but maybe like one, enough that it's like noticeable and that most people in this small town like know somebody who's gone missing. And so basically like the garbage dump is the bottom, this is maybe a little spoilery, but like at the bottom of the garbage dump there's like an entity that's what caused the sinkhole. It like crashed to earth, something maybe like a Lovecraftian type entity, but it needs to be fed. So like the person who owns the dump is like feeding it bodies. But it reanimates the dead bodies, so they're kind of.
So there's your Pet Cemetery.
Yeah, so they're like kind of zombies, but kind of not. So.
Alright, yeah, I would read that.
I wouldn't.
Well, as I always say to my friends and family, you don't have to read it, you just have to buy it.
I can buy it and give it to those who will read
There you
it.
go, yes.
Because Bella would love it.
I'd be careful, Susan, there might be a sinkhole in your front yard.
She can find my friend.
Yeah.
There might be a sinkhole on Preston and East Barbie.
It's a big hole now.
It is a big.
These cases have been in a sinkhole.
Are there any fun stories about the cover of that book?
Not really. So this was made by Andy Reed, who was, she's like a digital designer for Quirk, and so this was all done with like Photoshop, I think. But yeah, so like, I think the only thing that I really wanted changed, so this is pretty much like the first draft. I mean, I think like she like cleaned up some stuff, but the only thing that was different was they had the title in like mixed lettering, so it was like capital T, lowercase, everything else. And I understand that they were like trying to go for like, somebody wrote this with chalk, or like climbing chalk, but when it was mixed case, it looked like a little kid wrote it.
Yeah.
So they changed it to like all caps, and I think it looks a lot better.
I love the
Yeah,
cover.
red rum, yeah.
Yeah. I like the cover a lot too. I was like kind of nervous because for me, like this publisher has like, just my personal taste has a little bit like hit or miss covers, but I like both the covers that they've done for me. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like they were open to your suggestions somewhat.
Yeah, and that was one thing that I did really enjoy about working with Quirk as it was when I was working with them was I did feel pretty comfortable like pushing back a little, like, and you know, I didn't always like, I think when I pushed back on this, like I really wanted like a different font, and they were like, they made it capital, and that was like kind of the compromise. And I don't think it looks bad by any stretch.
No.
It looks good.
And it did solve my issue of like, it looked like a little kid wrote it, which was only a problem because I was like, I don't want people to think there's no children in this book.
screen adaptation of that? Is that something you would be
I
interested in
mean,
selling, or?
I would love it, but honestly, I think the problem is that one, nobody in Hollywood knows who I am. Like, this is neither of my book. They've both sold well,
Mhm.
and they've both, if you know anything about, like, this might not mean anything to some people, but they both have earned out their advance.
Mhm.
So this one earned out in 6 months, and that one earned out in 3 months. And
Wow.
that's really fast.
Congratulations.
Thank
on that.
you. So they're not like unknown books, but they're not like bestsellers. They're not like on the New York Times bestseller list or anything. So I think that's one problem, is just like, I don't like the books, and I don't have like that instant name recognition.
sure.
And I think the other problem is that probably from a producer's perspective, they're thinking filming rock climbing would be very expensive and hard because they're not creative enough to figure out how to trick the viewer.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, okay, we'll just like turn the rock wall like this way, and then they're crawling.
Yeah.
And you just like make it look like they're climbing. Or you just like, they're only like a few feet off the ground, but you use perspective to
Yeah.
make it look like they're really high up, you know, it's like, so I think those are the two problems.
Well,
is
it
that-
seems really ripe for, I mean, Blair Witch was made for what,
Yeah.
like $10,000 or something
Yeah.
like that? Just like, it feels really ripe for something like that.
Yeah, I think like I think it would need like a creative, independent filmmaker. But I think when it was like, before it came out, or like really close to its release, my agent would like, he would be like, I'm sending it to this person, or this person wants to look at it, but nobody ever wanted to like option it. So at this point, when he sends me those, I'm just like, okay, I'll get excited when somebody sends a contract.
Yeah. Well, hopefully as
Yeah.
your bibliography expands and,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, I think like this book is only like 2 years old.
Yeah.
I know like Grady Hendrix, I don't think like any of his books were made into a movie until like many years after he was like on bestseller lists. Like, I think the first one was My Best Friend's Exorcism, and that one just came out like a couple years ago, and that book had been out for like, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 or more years when the movie was made. So it's not like it's gonna expire.
Right.
But yeah, so far there has been no interest in terms of like contract stage for either of them. And then I don't know very much about it, but I've heard from other authors, like, even if somebody options it, that doesn't mean it's gonna be made into a movie. That
Right.
just means like they hold the rights to do that until the option expires.
Yeah.
And you don't get very much money from options.
Right.
Actually, I don't think you get very much money, unless you like write the script, or like
Right,
do some
if you-
actual work.
Cause I don't know how many residuals you get
Yeah.
from selling the concept, but
Yeah,
screenwriters
from my
obviously.
understanding, if you want to like make a lot of money from the actual film, you have to like do something. You can't just be like, I wrote the book that you based it on. You have to like write the script or
Yeah.
do something else like that, which sort of makes sense. And I guess like the big thing for authors would be like, if your book is made into a movie, then that might lead to more sales of the book.
Yeah, yeah. Are you interested in writing for the screen?
I have tried. I started a screenplay for Crafting for Sinners and got stuck because, so Crafting for Sinners, it might be maybe a little easier with this book, but Crafting for Sinners, the problem I was running into was that like, as the two different mediums, so like Crafting for Sinners is like all in the perspective of one person, and there's a lot of interiority, but I'm like, how do I translate that to a film? Like, obviously some of it could be how the actor would portray, like her facial expressions and things like that. But then some of it is like, she's like thinking about things, and I'm like, I don't personally love voiceovers. Like, I think they're cheesy, but it's like, and then there's like backstory stuff, and it's like, how do I get this information to a viewer in a film, and like what parts of it do I cut, and how do I get like that part of the story in without like doing a million flashbacks or like voiceovers. And so that's kind of where I got stuck trying to write a screenplay for that. I think, like I said, I think this one might be a little easier to write a screenplay because I don't think there's not as much interiority because you have 4 characters that you're switching between. But yeah, I did try, but I think I got like a few chapters in, and I was just like, I don't know how to do this.
it does sound like it's two completely different,
They are.
you know,
Cause
things.
cause like when you're writing a script, you're really thinking about like, at least this is how I tried to approach it, cause makes sense to me, but you're really thinking about like, it's more so about like dialogue and then like visually what might be happening. And you can put like, I read a few scripts when I was trying to write it, and like, you know, they would put stuff like, they're thinking about this and they have a, you know, grimace look on their face or something, but I'm like, I don't understand how that gets translated to the viewer.
What
Right,
if your person was an outward thinker, like talks when they
to themselves.
Yeah, they could do that. That's definitely an option. I've kind of abandoned that for now, but I might pick it up once I'm done with the third book if I don't immediately get another idea for a fourth book.
My screenwriting mentor in college told me to, I put way too much detail in my scene setting. I took like a script from like 13 pages to like 9 pages by just cutting out all the things, and I'm like, the director will make that decision.
Yeah.
They can do that, but converting a book that you have all of the material already there, that, I feel like that would be impossible, like killing children as you cut certain parts out of that.
Yeah, and I mean, the mediums are different for sure, and I mean, and also like I talked to an author friend who had written like a script of his book, and it got made into a movie, but their book was much easier because it was like I guess that one's like mostly one setting, but theirs was like about, it's called We Need to Do Something, and it's like set in a bathroom, and it's kind of like crazy stuff is happening outside of the bathroom.
Yeah.
So you can kind of like imagine.
Yeah.
Use your imagination. But I talked to them about it, and they were saying, you know, it's like just because like the story goes one way in your book, it doesn't mean it has to go that way in the film. So that's like another option, is to kind of like just sort of use that as a loose basis and then do something totally different in the film or in the script version. But the filmmakers will miss their chance because all the closing Joannes are already gone.
Oh no, yeah.
They can't just buy a closing Joannes to film in.
Okay, people, I have no idea what my.
Any other questions or anything?
Thank you very much.
Thank
Yeah,
you
thank
for
you.
visiting us.
We have our own copy of the book. Would you be willing to sign it?
Yeah.